Hi guys, I hope you're all well and welcome to episode 147 of the Layton Fitness Podcast. Now in this specific episode we'll be discussing, is clean eating preventing you from achieving your fat loss goals? So I've spoken about this topic many times before, but I think it's worth revisiting because in my opinion this is probably the number one reason that's actually holding people back from achieving their fat loss goals. And what I mean by that is typically people get caught up in judging foods in meals in isolation as opposed to focusing on what does count, which is essentially creating a calorie deficit over a chronic period of time over the course of the day, week and month. Fat loss is very simple. We need to be burning more calories than we're consuming over a chronic period of time, as opposed to what most people are typically doing is just looking at foods and meals in isolation, saying that food is good, that food is bad, or that meal is good, or that meal is bad. And they don't actually know how many calories they're consuming on a day-to-day basis. They don't know whether they're actually creating an energy deficit or not. And typically people will get some results initially by focusing on a quote-unquote clean eating approach, which is typically just eliminating processed foods if they've got a decent amount of weight to lose. So in this context, just by default, by having more single ingredient whole foods, it's relatively straightforward to create a calorie deficit. However, as you become lean, you need to start actually consciously tracking how many calories you're actually consuming on a day-to-day basis to guarantee you're creating this energy deficit. And you may have experienced this before. You may have seen great results initially just by reducing processed food, and by default your calories will be reduced. But over time, as you get leaner, you need to constantly reduce calories and or increase energy expenditure from more cardio to continue creating the energy deficit needed for fat loss. And that's really the purpose of this podcast, is stop judging foods in isolation and start looking at the day's nutrition intake. Start looking at how many calories you're actually eating on a day-to-day basis. Start getting some well set up macronutrient and calorie targets that will create the energy deficit needed for fat loss. One key point I want you to remember is no food is good or bad in isolation. There's only good and bad diets, and what I mean by that is even if you were to have 100% of your nutrition intake from single ingredient whole foods, if you're in a position where you're creating a 5,000 calorie surplus, I don't care how healthy the foods are, you're going to gain weight over a chronic period of time and start to have some health problems, regardless of how healthy or clean the foods you're eating are. If you're in a 5,000 calorie surplus, you're going to gain body fat, you're going to start to have health issues. So it's not just about the food type, the food quality, it's the dosage and the quantity of that and how it actually fits into your day's calorie intake. Another big reason why I want you to come away from this clean eating mindset is it starts to create a bad relationship with food. You start to box foods in as good and bad, and that therefore means that when you do have any of these foods that are in the bad side, so for example processed food, you start to feel guilty, you start to binge on these. I know I've been in a position many years ago when I used to do this. I'd have clean food pretty much all the time, so single ingredient whole food, and then I'd binge on the processed food, and it just creates a vicious cycle. You may be in a similar position yourself. So instead of actually focusing on these foods are good, these foods are bad, my suggestion is to have a flexible approach, and that therefore means you're going to have approximately 80 to 90% of your nutrition intake from single ingredient whole foods, lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of good quality protein sources, good quality carbohydrate and fat sources, then have 10-20% from things you love, some processed food in moderation. As long as you're still within your daily macronutrient and calorie targets, you're still going to be able to achieve your fat loss goals and still have some processed food in moderation. The key thing is the processed food is not dominating your diet. You're still getting all of your micronutrient needs from all the fruits and vegetables, good quality protein sources, carbohydrate and fat sources, etc. So it's not like the processed food is dominating the diet. You're still going to get all the health benefits from the single ingredient whole foods, but by having 10-20% of your intake from things you love, it just allows you to adhere to your calories and macronutrient targets for much longer, to have more of a social life as well. You can go on gatherings and still not feel guilty when you do have some processed food, but you're still going to achieve your fat loss goals. So hopefully this has been useful. Hopefully this has opened your eyes to instead of just looking at foods or meals in isolation, start looking at the bigger picture, start looking at the diet as a whole, start looking at how many calories you're actually consuming on a day-to-day basis, focus on actually creating that energy deficit over the course of the day, week, and month, over a chronic period of time. You'll achieve your fat loss goals with much less stress. You can still have some processed food in moderation. You're still going to get all those health benefits from all those single ingredient whole foods that's dominating your diet, and it just creates a much healthier relationship with food. So thank you very much for listening. If you've still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to James Layton, Layton fitness.co.uk, you'll see a tab at the top of the page called free ebook. You can download that immediately. If you're still yet to subscribe to the podcast, please do, as this will prevent you from missing any episodes every single week. Thank you very much. I'll speak to you next week.